Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Gray and this video is for my online LIBS action project. So my action project is about the school to prison pipeline. I want to begin this video with the quote said by Nelson Mandela. He said, "Education is the most powerful weapon in which you can use to change the world." With that being said, let's dive right into this. The true value of education is dependent not only upon the students, but it's also dependent on faculty, administrations, teachers, and the people who make the policies for the education system. So it is their responsibility to create the foundation of the learners of today and tomorrow. So, New York Times wrote in their article in 2013 about the school to prison pipeline, about how it all began. So, let's take it all the way back to 1999, April 20th. So, the Columbine shooting is what really started this all. So, this took place in Colorado Columbine, and a number of 15 people tragically lost their lives in this shooting. So, after the school shooting, educators and policymakers decided that we need to make the education place a safer place to learn for students. So with that being said, they began to implement new policies such as the Zero Tolerance Policy Act, as well as the No Child Left Behind Act. And then also they started placing SOR officers in high schools, as well as they began to put up metal detectors and force students to walk through metal detectors and get searched before they entered the schools. So the school to prison pipeline has become a social issue due to students dropping out and being absent and creating social disturbances. We need to make suspension and expelling students the last result, as well as implementing restorative justice instead of these harsh policies. In addition, drastic changes must need to be made within these policies in order to restore education back to its value. So we need to switch priorities and concerns rather than test scores and funding to achieve intellectual progression in the classroom. So the No Child Left Behind Act, just a little bit more information about it. It was passed with bipartisan in 2002, which was only 4 years after the Columbine shooting. So this was for students in grades kindergarten through 12. It was designed to introduce national standards to a system in which students in wealthier economical demographic groups were more likely to succeed than others in lower economical areas were likely to be left behind. So ultimately, it allows states to determine how success is measured equally throughout cities. And I pulled this from the New York Times article again, like I said. The goal of the act is to set a goal for the United States educational system to exceed scores in academics. It is understandable that people argue the importance of a goal in order to foresee progression in students' test scores. However, what happens when schools cannot receive enough funding or experienced teachers to teach these students effectively to make sure they are on the right path they need to be on? If these students are not given the tools they need, how will they be able to think critically or independently? So without the fundamentals of education being available for all students, no matter where they located or reside or lay their head at night, it is more likely that the trend of the school to prison pipeline will continue. So each year, Linda Darrow reported in the Vox magazine that almost 1/3 of public school students and nearly 1/2 of the youth of color do not graduate high school on time. This is a problem, but yet people are not making it as a big enough problem as it should be because it's only hurting the African American students. So the problem is particularly addressed towards us. And African American students, we represent about 15% of those below the age of 18, but we make up 14% of all student dropouts. So 26% of all youths arrested, and we make up 46% of those detained in juvenile jails, with 48% with 58% of juveniles sent to adult prisons. So the school to prison pipeline is not an ideology, and it's just not just claims, but the number speaks for itself. We are disproportionate, and they are funneling us into these systems. So an additional factor for the social issue of the school to prison pipeline is the zero tolerance policy, like I mentioned earlier. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about that. So schools across the United States has formed this zero tolerance policy in elementary schools and high schools. So they're supposed to create a safer learning environment by keeping weapons and drugs out of the schools. Punishment can range from anything between detention for a few days or suspension or expulsion from the school. However, the consequences of suspension and expulsion do not seem logical. So if students is suspended with an out of school suspension, of which they are not allowed to enter schools, they are missing class time. And it's not really punishing them in the long run, it's only affecting them because it's also forcing them to go be on the streets because their parents are at work and they don't have no one to watch them. So they're just bored all day. So they just turn to the streets for entertainment, or students tend to fall behind the curve because they're missing class time. So also, whether the student is getting a suspension or expulsion, they will also tend to care less likely about their schoolwork and drop out of school because they were just like, hey, like I already been suspended. So why? They lose motivation and they lose hope. So students dropping out with a minimum of education and life skills, it develops the student is more likely to turn to criminal activity and have criminal offenses. And this I pulled from the Global Issues in Context, America School and University, and they wrote that in 2016. So I chose the school to prison pipeline as my action project because this kind of hit home. So growing up, I went to a predominantly white school, but there was a lot of African Americans there as well, but we were disproportionate. So I witnessed peers get suspended and expelled and get charges for doing something as fighting in school. So when you're in high school, your brain is developing the most. This is when you're trying to figure out who you are. And of course, there's peer pressure. And growing up in Generation Z and millennials, social media played a huge role in our life. So I witnessed so many students get kicked out and expelled from school, even catch a misdemeanor. So I know this girl that I went to school with, she caught a misdemeanor when she got into a fight at school. So now this misdemeanor is on her record for life. So it might also affect her getting a job. It might affect her with her credibility and everything. So it really hurts African American because of the zero tolerance policy. Instead, we could have just set her down and set the other girl down who she got in a fight with and tried restorative justice and had them talk it out instead of giving a whole 16-year-old girl a misdemeanor. So let's go there. Sorry. So with the attention to the zero tolerance policy, police officer has used this as an excuse also to arrest students on school campuses. So this is another issue. So a 6-year-old girl in Florida was handcuffed. A 6-year-old girl in Florida was handcuffed by a school resource officer and taken to the county jail after she threw a tantrum in her kindergarten class. Really? She threw a tantrum. She was arrested and taken to jail, into the county jail. So Saquana Cotton was also another 14-year-old high school freshman in Paris, Texas, when she was arrested for shoving a hall monitor. She was convicted of assault on a public servant and sentenced to prison term up to 7 years. And this was reported by CNN School Safety in 2013. This is ridiculous. But the only people that are going to jail are African American students. This is why this topic is not covered so much. But we are so disproportionate because of this. So the correct way to deal with violence and issue is to practice restorative justice. The federal government is asking school to make suspension and expulsion the last result. In Oakland, California, public schools are trying something called restorative justice. Restorative justice is where both parties in a conflict is to discuss with the counselor instead of relying on punishment. So like I was saying earlier, they really should sit down with a professional and talk about their issues and the underlying reason of why they behaved a certain way, so you could get to the bottom of it and help the child as they are needed, because something might be going on internally or at home and they really just need some help or someone to talk to. But yet the education system is failing thousands of students because we are not doing this. Instead, we are just so quick to kick African American students out of the school and just leave them on the streets to fend for them own. And that with the lack of education, who knows where they'll end up at? And that's a problem. So we also need to take everything into consideration that I said. I really want to call an action. This call to action is that we must, one, look out for all the students. And if you see someone in help or going through some things, please help out your peers, help out all the students you can, because there might be an underlying reason that you just might not know about. Also, my call to action is to the schools. You guys really need to stop expelling students. Please start implementing restorative justice. So one thing I want to leave school authorities with. So I know you guys hope that your students don't end up in the criminal justice system, and you really put a lot of hard work and faith into developing try to develop every student that walk in through your door. But please don't let it be on your shoulders to where you incarcerate another African-American male or another African-American woman because the schools push them there. So schools, please stop pushing students to the criminal justice system, but instead help them become the leaders of today and tomorrow. Thank you.